Jim Davis on Jeskai Aggro against Dan Musser on Bant Eldrazi.
And I believe we saw Jim Davis play a Bant Eldrazi opponent earlier, and we saw that Jim's formula of just getting a little bit of damage with his first couple creatures and to finish his opponent off with burn spells worked out quite well, and we'll see if he can do it here again.
All right, well, Jim is on 6, and he's going to start off with a Gitaxian Probe falling to 18. You'll see a hand that's Reality Smasher, Eldrazi Sky Spawner, Eldrazi Temple, Windswept Heath Forest, Yavimaya Coast, and a Cavern of Souls.
So this hand looks like it's capable of a turn 2 Eldrazi Sky Spawner and a turn 4 Reality Smasher. So pretty good start for Dan Musser if he was going to be aggressive. Not necessarily the best draw to have on the defense. Also, it's a very mana-heavy hand, so Dan is going to be looking for the top of his library to give him some more gas.
Now, while this is technically a win and in for Jim and Dan, it's based on the fact that they have much higher tie breaks. It looks like the 33-point matches go all the way down to table 10.
Wow.
So we might end up in a situation
Crazy.
where we have 2 or 3 people that finish 12-3 that
And
don't
miss on
make it into the
tiebreakers.
top 8.
Yeah, I've been 9th and 10th place plenty of times. Does not feel good.
Jim is going to lead off here with a Sacred Foundry, shocking himself down to 16 and attacking with his Goblin Guide. Going to pass the turn over to Dan Musser.
You know, Jim's deck doesn't have very many 1-drops. It only has the 4 Goblin Guide and 4 Monastery Swift Spear, but we've seen him on camera consistently have one of these 1-drops. It's been pretty good for him, and I wonder if he's actually trying to mulligan to them, or maybe mulliganing a little bit more aggressively to find them.
All right, well, Dan is just going to play a Cavern of Souls, naming Eldrazi, and pass the turn back to Jim Davis. Jim's going to fetch with his Arid Mesa, popping down to 15. Let's see if he goes to 13 and gets a blue source.
Yeah, I feel like the likely land to get here is a Steam Vent so that he has plenty of red mana and access to a little bit of white and blue mana. And it looks like Jim is likely going to follow this up with a Storm Chaser Mage, curving out perfectly from 1-drop into 2-drop. And the Storm Chaser Mage in particular is relevant because it's flying. We saw earlier that the Bant Eldrazi deck, it's good at blocking on the ground. It's not very good at blocking in the air, and so those flying creatures are at a premium for Jim's offense.
Yeah, this is the same matchup that we saw Jim
Previously in
top deck, the exact cards that he needed in those 2 games to beat Ben Friedman, who was on Bant Eldrazi. Jim is just going to fall to 13, get a Steam Vents. He's going to play Storm Chaser Mage and attack with both Goblin Guide and Storm Chaser Mage. Goblin Guide will reveal a Windswept Heath for Dan Musser, which will pop into his hand. He'll take 3 points of damage and fall down to 15. Jim's just going to pass the turn, and let's see if Dan can find some action. Eldrazi Temple is going to join Cavern of Souls and cast Eldrazi Sky Spawner. This is going to bring about a 1/1 Eldrazi Scion. 2 blockers, a very good spot to be in against Jim Davis.
Yeah, they're 2 blockers, but they're not particularly great blockers. The likely thing to happen from here is the Sky Spawner trades with the Goblin Guide, and then the Eldrazi Scion gets sacrificed to put that Reality Smasher into play. And Dan Musser could actually race Jim Davis with the Reality Smasher.
Well, here is a Mountain for Jim. He's going to play another Storm Chaser Mage. All 3 creatures are going to attack. Goblin Guide trigger will resolve a Spellskite on top of Dan's deck.
And Dan's probably worried about a couple things here. He's at 15, but if Jim had something like a Lightning Bolt, just the Storm Chaser Mages and the Prowess trigger would mean that a Lightning Bolt would mean that Dan would potentially take a boatload of damage. But it looks like Jim is just going to clear the blocker, make it so that Dan has no good blocks.
Jim's going to use Lightning Bolt on that Eldrazi Sky Spawner. That's going to grow both Storm Chaser Mages into 2/4s.
And this represents 6 damage. Another attack like this and a Lightning Bolt means that Jim would be able to present lethal to Dan Musser. So Dan has to be thinking that Jim may be putting Dan on a 1-turn clock.
Now, Jim does have a Mutagenic Growth. This is the last card in his hand. So if Dan doesn't block here, Jim can cast that, fall to 11, and deal 10 damage to Dan, which is going to knock him down to 5. And those 2 Storm Chaser mages could just be lethal with any burn or pump spell.
Yeah, and it looks like that is indeed what Jim chooses to do.
So Storm Chaser, or mutagenic growth on the Storm Chaser mage, we're going to have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 points of damage, knocking Dan Musser down to 5.
So this is nice because it puts Jim in a situation where he basically just needs to top deck a burn spell, and he's likely going to be able to finish Dan off.
Or a Mantis Rider.
Or a Mantis Rider.
We might see Mantis Rider win this modern match.
And Jim knows what Dan is drawing, so that's going to give him a little bit of extra information to make that decision. And now Dan has to try to figure out, is my best play here to just play the Reality Smasher? Do I want to take a damage to potentially play this Ancient Stirrings, knocking him down to 4? There's not particularly good options for Dan Musser. And when we think about it, this is Dan's turn number 3.
I was going to say, it's pretty telling of how aggressive and fast the format can be, with just how much of a boon being on the play is. That
right.
Dan is playing a deck that can play Thought-Knot Seer on turn 2, has lands that produce 2 mana for his spells, and he even has one here and is already at 5 life on turn 3 and facing down a giant board from Jim.
Yeah.
Your pairings have been posted for round number 4.
Here we just have another Sky Spawner from Dan.
Players, your round 4 pairings have been posted.
So this is a good play for purely defensive reasons, but it doesn't actually help Dan get much traction in this game state, because the Eldrazi Sky Spawner and those Scions, while they can block, they're going to have a hard time trading with anything. Dan can trade the 2 Scions for the Goblin Guide, but that Sky Spawner is just going to be a chump block on one of those Storm Chaser mages. And Dan really doesn't have an answer for those flyers.
Well, he may end up using one of those Scions along with this Forest to play that Spellskite, which could help insulate him against a burn spell, potentially. But it is a much better blocker against the Goblin Guide.
Yeah. Another thing you could do is just sacrifice both of the Scions to cast the Spellskite, and then use the Forest to cast Ancient Stirrings and hopefully dig for something good. But it looks like he values keeping that Scion around.
He's going to get in for a point of damage.
So the 1 point of damage may not seem particularly relevant, but this does mean that Jim Davis is on a 2-turn clock from a Reality Smasher. Is it a burn spell? Oh, look at him slow roll himself.
Jim's been very good at drawing lightning bolts in these situations.
Yeah, can he do it?
So let's see what he can find. Even something like Vapor Snag would be very good.
Jeez.
And it is the Vapor Snag.
And that is game.
So that's going to target the Eldrazi Sky Spawner. Dan is going to lose a life, 2 prowess triggers.
Yeah, and he can redirect it, but it really doesn't do what it wants it to do.
And that is going to be game. Jim Davis just ripping him. Just for posterity's sake, the next card he just drew was a lightning bolt. So
oh man,
they were coming. So Jim Davis is going to take game 1 here on Jeskai Aggro against Bant Eldrazi. Let's take a look at the sideboards. Dan has 3 Engineered Explosives, 3 Grafdigger's Cage, 2 Rest in Peace, 2 Stubborn Denial, 2 Stony Silence, 1 Negate, 1 Disdainful Stroke, 1 Dismember. What do we think he's going to do?
So the cards I like the most are the 2 Stubborn Denials and the Negate. I think Dan's going to be able to clog up the ground, but he wants to be able to interact with the burn spells. You can also consider Engineered Explosives. All of Jim's threats are 1 and 2 mana creatures.
Now on Jim's side, we have 4 Spell Pierce, 3 Surgical, 2 Geist of St. Traff, 2 Gutshot, 2 Path to Exile, 2 Smash to Smithereens. What do you think he's going to do?
So the cards that I think that he can bring in are the 2 Path to Exiles and the Geist of St. Traff. Also very small consideration to Gutshot, although unlikely. He may not even want to bring in Geist of St. Traff either, because it's hard for him to keep the path clear. The main value of Geist of St. Traff is really just a 4-point burn spell.
Now, both of these players are pretty well-known stalwarts on the SCG Tour. Jim Davis in particular is your players champion, reigning players champion. And I have to imagine that he's going to be playing on the brand new 2017 Season 1 schedule. So let's take a look at that. It's going to start off in Atlanta for the Invitational weekend, December 2nd through the 4th, with the Standard and Modern Invitational and a Standard Open. Next up, we'll be in Columbus for Standard. Then we'll be in Richmond, January 28th through 29th for Standard. Next, we'll be in Regional Championships, February 4th for Modern. After that, we'll go to Baltimore for our Team Open, which is going to be one Standard deck, one Modern deck, one Legacy deck. February 25th to 26th, we'll be in Indianapolis playing Modern. Then we'll be in Dallas at the beginning of March for Modern, and then in Worcester, Massachusetts, for Legacy, April 8th through the 9th.
And then after that, we're going to be heading on to Atlanta for a Standard Open, another Standard Open in Louisville. Then we'll be able to play Modern, the format that you're seeing today. Charlotte will also be playing Modern. And then finally, we'll cap it all off with our Season 1 Invitational. And it's going to be Modern and Standard. We'll crown another champion, find out who's going to be getting their name on a token, and it's going to be pretty sweet.
Now, whenever you play in any of the Opens or Classics on the SCG Tour, you get some exclusive playmats featuring iconic art from whatever format it is that you're going to be playing in. So throughout all of Season 1 next year, if you play in a Standard, Open, or Classic, you're going to get this awesome Smuggler's Copter playmat. But you also get a neat one if you play in a Modern Open or Classic. It's the Aethervial Masterpiece Edition from Kaladesh. And in the Legacy Opens and Classics, you get a sweet art of Gamble from Eternal Masters. So again,
the Crowbar Girl.
Again, these are absolutely free for playing in any of our Opens or Classics throughout Season 1 of 2017. So make sure you head out to one of those tournaments today. Well, not today, but when it happens, to get your playmat and play in some sweet, sweet Magic. And you can find that schedule on our website, StarCityGames.com. On the right-hand side, there's the 2017 schedule.
I just love that Gamble playmat. The girl with the crowbar, for some reason, I don't know why, that gives me such enjoyment, but it is just, I don't know, it's just so funny to see her running away with that gem and the crowbar in her hand.
So while our players are finishing up shuffling here, let's learn a little bit more about your current reigning Players Champion, Jim Davis. He is the captain of TeamMetaGameGurus.com. He's 32 from Long Island, New York, with 11 Open top 8s and 2 wins with 2 Invitational top 8s. In addition to playing Magic and streaming, he's also a local radio DJ hosting a weekly show every Monday. He loves hockey, was captain of the Stony Brook University roller hockey team, and he won the 2015 SCG Players Championship.
Yeah, Jim Davis is a great player, good guy, fellow New Yorker. I've known him for a while, run into him at a lot of events, and I've gotten to play against him in a lot of Opens, and he's a very tight, very clean player, and someone who also has a pretty wide range. Sometimes you see him playing dedicated blue-white control decks. He was originally known as a Goblins player, and now you see him with this very, very aggressive Jeskai aggro deck.
A deck that was worked on and played first by Jeff Hoagland, actually, at the Milwaukee Open, which was Modern.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that's great to do is when you know who the big brewers are in the format, Jeff Hoagland certainly being one of them, it's always good to keep an eye on what decks they're bringing to the format, because it may be something that perks your interest. You can grab that deck, tune it, maybe even do better than Jeff himself did with it. And that's what we're kind of seeing Jim Davis do here today.
Looks like Dan is going to keep his hand, and Jim is going to take a mulligan down to 6. While he finishes up shuffling, why don't we learn a little bit more about Dan Musser? He is 31 from Akron, Ohio. He has 7 Open top 8s with 1 win. Hasn't captured any Invitational top 8s, but maybe that will change later on this year in Atlanta. He has a master's degree in applied mathematics. Means he's quite smart. He claims that Pikachu is his spirit animal, and he's a big fan of Taylor Swift. What about yourself? Are you feeling, I guess, 22?
Every once in a while, I like to shake it off.
All right. So go ahead and pop back to our match. For those of you just now joining us, we're in round 15 of 15 of our Modern Open. Jim Davis, Dan Musser, heading here into game 2. Jim is up a game. Both players are 11-3, and based off of their tie breaks, this should be a win and in for one of these players. Whoever wins will likely be in and on to the top 8.
So I'm venturing a guess here. I do not know for sure, but I imagine that we've seen Jim mulligan both of these games, and we've seen him have his 1-drops with a pretty high consistency. I suspect that he's probably mulliganing every single hand that doesn't have a 1-drop, or every 7-card hand that doesn't have a 1-drop, and then keeping every reasonable 6-card hand. I certainly don't know that for sure. I'm completely venturing a guess, but a lot of times with these really aggressive decks where you want the opening turns of the game to play out very specifically, you end up having pretty strict mulligan rules for yourself. And I think that's part of the reason why we see Jim mulliganing a lot and having his 1-drop so consistently despite having so few in his deck.
All right, well, Jim is going to keep his 6. Dan is going to start off with a Temple Garden, shocking himself down to 18, and he'll play a Birds of Paradise.
And this Birds of Paradise is pretty threatening. We've been able to see, wow, and he has the gut shot out of the sideboard. I wasn't sure if he'd bring it in, and I said he might have it just for the Birds of Paradise. There we go.
That one's for you, Patrick Sullivan. Jim Davis with the gut shot. Going to fall to 18, take care of the Birds of Paradise. He doesn't have a 1-drop, though, so he'll just play an Arid Mesa and pass the turn. Dan has a Brush Lance and a pass for his turn. Jim's going to fall down to 17 on Dan's end step and use his Arid Mesa to go find likely a tapped Shockland. That will be a Steam Vents.
I would really like to see Jim just bolt Dan Musser while he's at 18, you know? Just as Patrick Chapin likes to say, just send him a message.
Send him a message.
Yeah, let him know what's up. So it was awesome that Jim had the gut shot. That was absolutely great. But he doesn't have any pressure yet, and that's really the missing piece of the puzzle.
Well, it looks like he does have a Storm Chaser Mage in his hand, so it's likely that that's what we're going to see here.
Yeah. Even still, Dan being able to get to his 3rd turn, being at, wow. So he's able to deal with that. So Dan's at 15 life, but the board is going to be clear.
All right, so Jim does have a Storm Chaser Mage that he'll attack with. Dan's going to use a Dismember, fall to 14, and take care of it.
Notably, Dan Musser actually had to sweat another Fire Exchange mana card, Mutagenic Growth, there if Jim had it.
That would have been a pretty big
unbelievable. So if we compare this to the last game, Dan Musser is at 14 on his turn 3, deploying a creature facing an empty board. Previous game on Dan Musser's 3rd turn, he was practically dead on board already.
He was at 5 facing 3 creatures.
Yeah. So huge turn of events, partially because Dan is on the play and partially because Jim's draw has not really come together in the same way.
All right. Well, Dan has a Brushland and an Eldrazi Displacer. For Jim's turn, he's just going to start off with a Cataxian Probe, falling down to 15. And he sees a hand of Drowner of Hope.
Oh,
Eldrazi
wow, and this is
Temple,
looking great for
and
Dan
a
Musser.
Reality Smasher.
This means that Reality Smasher is coming down on the following turn with that Eldrazi Temple, making 2 mana for it. And Dan Musser, if he top decks another land, is going to be able to play that Drowner of Hope. And this game is looking really bad for Jim Davis.
Looks like Jim picked up a copy of Twisted Image, so he has all these cards to interact with Noble Hierarch and Birds of Paradise, but not enough threats.
And this is something that I would expect to happen to Jim Davis's deck every once in a while because his deck is very threat light. His creature base is only the 4 Goblin Guides, 4 Monastery Swiftspirit, 4 Storm Chaser Mage, and the 4 Snapcaster Mages with 4 Mana Striders to round things out. So considering when you compare it to a deck like Affinity, which is very, very creature dense, or a traditional Zoo deck, it's certainly understandable that Jim would have some draws that would be a little light on the threats.
All right, well, Jim is going to Twisted Image that Eldrazi Displacer to draw a card. He'll use his Arid Mesa to fetch out likely a basic mountain. You don't really want to shock here in the face of this impending Reality Smasher.
Yeah, that said, Jim isn't really going to get rewarded by slowing this game down. So he doesn't want to shock, but he definitely wants untapped mana.
Here's a Goblin Guide. And he has a Lightning Bolt in hand. All right, so he's just going to attack, trigger the Goblin Guide, reveal a Windswept Heath. Lightning Bolt is going to take care of the Eldrazi Displacer. That's going to knock Dan down to 12. And we are off to the races, but Jim has a hand that is just 2 lands.
Yeah, pretty weak, but we'll see what he can top deck. What I would like to see from Dan here is probably to just play the Reality Smasher and bash. He's got this path to exile. He's got another land for his Drowner in Hope. I think that Dan Musser probably wants to seize the initiative here and just close the game out quickly. That said, it certainly wouldn't be a mistake for Dan to play the Reality Smasher and just play defense, but I would be a little bit more worried about some flying creatures and some burn spells getting around that Reality Smasher. It is really scary, though, for Dan to try to engage in a race when he knows that Jim has access to cards like Lightning Helix.
And Vapor's Nag. All right, Reality Smasher is going to come down.
Bash, come on, do it.
Dan has to decide if he wants to attack or not. Like I said before, I've blocked with a lot more Stormbreath Dragons than I have Reality Smashers. So
Yeah.
you know my stance on it.
There
All right,
we go.
get in the red zone. That's going to knock Jim down to 9.
We don't know how this is going to turn out, but for the record, Dan Musser, I like your play.
All right, ooh, well, there is a Lightning Helix. Goblin Guide is going to attack. It will trigger reveal another Path to Exile.
And the reason that I like this attack from Dan Musser is even with a Lightning Helix, which is basically worst case scenario, that's only going to put Dan to 7, and Jim is going to need 3 more pieces of burn to finish Dan off, and that Drowner in Hope is going to do a lot to not only stabilize the board for Dan and ensure that he doesn't take any more damage from creatures, but it's also going to be a good avenue for closing out the game quickly.
Well, Jim is going to shock himself down to 7.
And I believe that's because it was his only source of white mana. So that's the only way he has to fire off the Helix now. It might have been worth it, though, for him to just play that tapped, assume that he probably won't draw a white spell on the following turn. But by doing it this way, he opens up the possibility for Snapcaster Mage to flash that Lightning Helix back.
All right, Reality Smasher is going to come in.
You're not smashing any realities by blocking.
That is true. Jim is going to take it. He'll fall to 2.
And we'll see if, so it looks like Dan, if he was going to play his Drowner in Hope, would need to crack a fetch land. And, you know, being at 7 life is quite different than being at 6 life. So considering he has a Path to Exile, I like the fact that he's being a little slower to crack his fetch land, because he may end up just drawing a land that won't deal him damage.
Well, a probe for Jim is going to reveal 2 Path to Exile and a Drowner. Jim picked up a Path to Exile, and that'll handle that Reality Smasher, but that Drowner in Hope is going to be looming. And Jim is at 5.
Yep.
All right, Jim just passes the turn. Dan is going to Path to Exile the Goblin Guide.
Yep, and Jim knows that Goblin Guide is as good as dead, and that's one thing that I've really enjoyed about Jim's play when we've seen him you know, in all of these matches, is he has known when to stop attacking with Goblin Guide at just the right moment. Part of that is because of Gitaxian Probe, but...
All right, well, Dan will attack with his Reality Smasher. A Path to Exile will take care of it.
And the nice thing about this is now Dan is going to be able to get his 6th land for Drowner in Hope without having to crack his fetch land.
And so he will get a tapped Plains from the Path to Exile.
So does he have a Cavernous Souls or some source of blue mana that won't deal him damage? May also be that he just doesn't have an island in his deck. Doesn't look like he has an island in his deck.
No, it's just a breeding pool.
So I wonder if Dan has a way to cast Drowner of Hope without taking a point of damage.
He also has an Eldrazi Sky Spawner in his hand.
Yep, also requires blue mana. So it looks like Dan has decided he has to go down to 6. And I like this because Jim is going to need to top deck running burn spells to kill Dan. And that's going to take 2 turns for Jim to do. But this this Eldrazi is going to be a 1-turn clock for Dan.
Right. Well, Dan is going to go to 4. and play this Drowner of Hope. Jim actually, if he draws Lightning Helix or Snapcaster Mage
Yeah.
for Helix,
Things get messy.
can live
Yep.
and give himself another top deck, which he had been doing very well over the course of this tournament. But Dan Musser is going to take that game, even it up, one apiece. They're going into game 3, looking over the players' sideboards. Do we think that other players are going to make any changes? Do you think that like the path and the gut shot that we saw at a Jim are still worth being in there? Or
Yeah,
does he need to be more aggressive on the play?
So I love the gut shot, particularly when Jim is on the draw. I'm not as in love with it when he's on the play because he doesn't need to worry about Dan coming out ahead of him in the same way as when Dan's on the play. So you could certainly make a solid argument for having the gut shots on the draw, but not on the play. But you know, Jim's the master. We'll see if he has it in this game 3 or not.
Fair enough. Now, Jim is our current reigning Players Champion, and while you do get a whole lot of things for winning the Players Championship, there is something super exclusive that you get from winning an Invitational, and that's a token in your own likeness, much like Liam Lonergan did when he won our Season 2 Invitational this year with his Elf deck in Modern, and he chose to become the Elf Warrior token that you see being used by Dwinnen's Elite.
Yeah, and what I love about this is it's, you know, Liam's, he's a person who's known for playing elves. It's not a particularly common deck. He wins the Invitational, gets his, you know, token made, and now he's basically synonymous with elves, which is a pretty cool thing. So a great way to make your mark on basically Magic's history.
And you can receive these limited edition Invitational tokens at, you get one all open participants, all classic participants, and in all orders from StarCityGames.com beginning September 23rd at noon Eastern Standard Time, $5 minimum order.
I bet you there's people who have, you know, every single Invitational winner's token just in a binder, signed by the winner, dated, you know, chronologically organized. I feel like that's one of the sort of thing that some people who collect stuff would really get into.
All right, so we're heading into game 3 here. For those of you just now joining us, we have Dan Musser on Bant Eldrazi playing against Jim Davis, your current reigning Players Champion, on Jeskai Aggro. Both players are 11-3, and based off of the standings going into this round, it's very likely that the winner of this match will have a spot into our top 8, which is saying something considering it's looking like there's 2, maybe even 3 people that will end up at 12-3 and not make it into the top 8 because of the size of this tournament. And I did get word that Todd Anderson has won his match over Matthew Dilks, and looking at the way the math is going to line up, there's a chance that he gets 9th.
That is rough. A great run. You got to be proud of what you've done, but it is pretty disappointing to get 9th when you know that if you had just been paired against some different people, you might have been able to squeeze into 8th.
But who knows? We'll wait and see. This is one of those tournaments where if you're looking at the people towards the top with their in the records, with their breakers, Tom Ross, Jim Davis, Kevin Jones, Dan Jessup, all of these players have buys.
Yeah.
And the buys really help those tiebreakers as you get into day 2 in these long tournaments.
Mm-hmm. So in this third game, what I really want to see from Jim is a 1-drop. I want to see his creatures early and often, and then I want to see them backed up by removal spells. That's the formula that's going to help him achieve victory. Things might fall apart for him if he doesn't have an early creature. From Dan's side, the one thing that we haven't been able to see from a Bant Eldrazi deck is one of those classic turn 2 Thought-Knot Seers. That's the play that we think of as the reason that you want to play Bant Eldrazi. It's just such a good way to get a big body onto the board and really take some of the power out of your opponent's sails.
All right, so both players are going to take a look at their opening 7. Jim Davis will be on the play. He's contemplating if he wants to keep it or not.
And so as a viewer who's interested in this Jeskai aggro deck, the thing I'm most curious about is if Jim keeps a 7-card hand that doesn't have a 1-drop. Because I had that theory about the mulligans earlier, but it, you know, so I want to test that theory.
Jim is going to mulligan. And it looks like Dan might be keeping his hand. So while Jim is shuffling up, let's take a quick look and see who is already qualified for our Players' Championship this year. So at the end of Season 1, we saw Max McVitie won our Invitational, along with Jeff Hoagland, Jerry Thompson, and Team Card Hoarder's own Andrew Tenjum qualified off of points. And then as we headed into Season 2, looks like we got Liam Lonergan there with his elf token.
Yep. We also have Tom, the Boss Ross, good old Jessup, and Kevin Jones. And then we also had, Jim Davis be one of the players who's going to be returning as well after the previous win. So a bunch of great players. Is going to be exciting to see how they metagame against each other and what exactly they play, because those small invitational style tournaments are always interesting. People bring out things that they don't normally play, and it'll be interesting just to see also their sideboard options. Like, do they try to ignore a deck like Dredge, or there's tons of stuff that goes into that.
Yeah, the Players' Championship is always a great time. Interesting to watch and see what's going on with all of the different players. It's like Jim split his sleeve while Dan was shuffling his deck. Judge is going to replace it. That way they don't have to reshuffle the deck. They can just put it back, and now there is no known information to either of the players. I did get word that Connor Bowman won his X3 match against Andrew Ellenbogen, and Ben Weinberg won his match. He was actually X2 and got paired down against Nathan Ramsey, who was X3. So Ben Weinberg is going to be in our top 8. It looks like Ross Merriam and Matt Ayers drew, Robert Cucinato and Adam Franzi drew. So those 4 players are going to be in our top 8, along with Ben Weinberg. So it looks like we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 matches playing for 3 spots. So there are going to be 4 people that will be X3 and not in the top 8.
And I think when you said Ross Merriam, you meant Tom Ross.
Tom Ross, yes.
Yeah. Don't want to get the Ross Merriam fans excited for nothing.
The real boss.
Yeah, I know Ross Merriam has a lot of fans out there. So now Jim's looking at his 6-card hand, trying to decide if this is something that he can win with. And man, it would be brutal to see Jim lose this game. I think after the tournament, I'd have to go buy him like a beer and an ice cream sundae or something to cheer him up. This is tough.
Well, get him a sandwich from Melt.
Yeah.
All right. It's like Jim is deciding on his hand.
Yeah, and the thing with Jim is he kind of always has this face. Sometimes he just has a great hand, and he's just looking at it, and he's saying, well, which 1-drop do I want to play first? Or when I crack my fetch land, do I want to get Steam Vents or Sacred Foundry? So you can't, if you're sitting across from Jim, you can't always read as much as you want to into his body language, because when things are going really good or really bad, his body language is actually pretty similar.
Looks like the issue here is he does have a 1-drop, a Monastery Swiftspear, but Hallowed Fountain is his only land.
And it looks like he's keeping it and going for the Scry.
He'll keep Scry to the bottom. Fountain. He's going to shock himself down to 18 and pass the turn. He's got that Twisted Image just in case Dan Musser has a Noble Hierarch or a Birds of Paradise.
Yeah, and I think Jim knows that his advantage is getting onto the board before Dan, so targeting those 1-mana accelerants is certainly something that Jim wants to be able to do.
Dan's going to start off with a brush land here.
And I wonder if Dan is considering the option of having his Bird of Paradise get wrecked, basically.
Well, looks like he's going to go with an Ancient Stirrings. That's going to look at Noble Hierarch, Ancient Stirrings, Cavern of Souls, Noble Hierarch, and Thought Not Seer.
Oh, those are some good ones.
Looks like he's going to take a Cavern of Souls, rearrange those cards, and put them on the bottom. Pass the turn back to Jim. Now let's see if Jim can find a red mana source. He did scry to the bottom. Oh, and it's another Swiftspear, and all he can do is just pass the turn.
So one of the things that I like about Ancient Stirrings, and this has been one of the hallmarks of a lot of the Ancient Stirrings decks that we've seen in Modern, is making sure that when you play Ancient Stirrings, you're playing it in a way where you have the potential to draw gas or hit your land drops. So it really helps with the consistency of your draw.
Well, Dan is just going to play a Cavern of Souls, naming Eldrazi, and pass. Jim does find a Spire Bluff Canal for his second land. He'll cast a Storm Chaser Mage and attack. Let's see if Dan is going to use a Path to Exile to get rid of it. The big question here is, do you get rid of that Storm Chaser Mage and save the 1 damage and future damage? But then you're giving Jim extra lands where he missed his land drop last turn.
Yeah, I do agree with that, but considering Jim has hit his 2nd land drop, Dan knows that Jim's deck operates on relatively little mana, and Jim has all 3 of his colors. I think that the 1 damage and the fact that Dan is going to be able to use all of his mana this upcoming turn means that the Path to Exile is worthwhile.
All right, well, Jim is going to go get a snow-covered mountain from that Path to Exile. Dan has a Plains, and along with it, an Eldrazi Sky Spawner.
Yeah, and with no offense to speak of at the moment, Jim really needs some help. We need everyone out there, pool your energy. Jim's got to build up a real big Spirit Bomb to take down Dan Musser. There's going to be a lot of big Eldrazi that Jim's going to have to slog through.
Well, he does have 2 Swift Spears and 2 Lightning Lightning Helixes.
Yeah, he's got a lot of stuff to work with. The issue is whether or not it's too late. I mean, he can certainly have a good turn here where he plays 2 Swift Spears and the Helix. But it's still, you still got to wonder, is this too late?
Now,
because Dan is going to start playing some real big stuff.
Dan will be playing some big stuff, but if he can weather this storm, he has Engineered Explosives in hand, which will handle both of those Swift Spears.
Yeah, and I like blocking with just the Sky Spawner here to force a spell from Jim to get that Prowess trigger, knowing that Dan is going to be able to then Engineered Explosives both of Jim's creatures away while Jim is potentially tapped out. And after having Jim mulliganed, missing his land drops, having his creatures come out a little too late, and then Dan getting the opportunity to clear his board and get a clean 2-for-1, definitely puts Dan in just a dominating position in this game state. He's still at a relatively good life total. It's going to dip down to 13 on this turn, but he's still sitting pretty.
All right, so Jim is going to fall to 15 to fetch a shock. Lightning Helix is going to go up top, knocking Dan down to 15. Prowess triggers will happen. 1 Swift Spear is going to live. The other one is going to deal 2 points of damage to Dan, knocking him down to 13. But now, this Engineered Explosives can wreak havoc on Jim's board.
Yeah. And Dan will still have the Sky Spawner as potential blocker. Another thing he could do is save the Engineered Explosives for the following turn and just play the Thought-Knot Seer. The one nice thing about that is he's guaranteed to get something good out of Jim's hand, and Dan may decide that he's going to be able to keep these Monastery Swift Spears at bay without too much problems, and he may want to save his Engineered Explosives for a flyer, because that is one of the ways that Jim Davis could really steal the game, is if Jim has a flyer and Dan doesn't have an answer for it. Dan's deck really doesn't have that many answers for creatures, so being frugal with the ones that he does have certainly makes sense.
Well, let's see if Dan can pass up the value that would be this Engineered Explosives. He is going to attack for 1 with his Eldrazi Scion.
Because he attacked with the Scion, that makes me think that he's planning on using the Engineered Explosives here.
He does have another Sky Spawner, so he could just play out 2 more blockers.
So that is certainly a reasonable play. The problem with it is it's not really helping Dan gain any traction in this game.
Well, so he is just going to Thought-Knot Seer here, sacrificing the Scion.
And I think the reason he's doing this is because it allows him to keep the Stubborn Denial up. And so this will help guarantee that the Thought-Knot Seer doesn't die, and that he's able to counter whatever burn spell Jim might throw at him.
All right, and so Jim reveals a hand of Twisted Image and Lightning Helix. Dan's going to get rid of the Lightning Helix and leave Jim with just a Twisted Image.
And now Jim has a few things to think about. I'm not 100% sure if Stubborn Denial is on Jim's radar, It probably is, but even if it is on Jim's radar, he probably knows that Dan Musser is only going to be playing a few copies at most. So it'll be interesting to see how Jim navigates this situation. He could...
I think that whether it's Stubborn Denial or even something like Spell Pierce, the fact that Dan got rid of that Eldrazi Scion, which is a valuable blocker, to hold up the blue mana, just kind of screams something.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And it'll be interesting to see what he does. I like how he's not making an attack here. He could make an attack to just force some damage, but I like that he's choosing to be a little bit more patient, pick a better spot.
Well, Jim is just going to pass the turn, and now Dan can land this Engineered Explosives X=1. And crack it. It's going to take care of both of the Swift Spears on Jim's side.
And now if Dan makes an attack here, Jim is going to have the opportunity to do a decent counterattack.
So Thought-Knot Seer is going to come in for 4. I wonder if Jim's going to potentially try and Lightning Helix that Thought-Knot Seer and see if he can block and trade it off. Well, here comes the Snapcaster Mage.
Yeah, Jim does want to get whatever counterspell that is in Dan's hand out. And if possible, Jim would like to deal with the Thought-Knot Seer.
All right, Jim is going to flashback Lightning Helix targeting the Thought-Knot Seer.
And I think Dan probably has to counter this. The argument for not countering it is simply that he feels like the Thought-Knot Seer is not particularly important, but I think the Stubborn Denial goes down in value so much without a 4-power creature in play that you just got to fire it off.
Well, Dan is going to use his Stubborn Denial to counter the Lightning Helix. He does take a point of damage in the process, falling down to 12. Jim is going to start off with a Twisted Image on the Thought-Knot Seer. It's just a cycle. Oh, and he has 2 lands in hand.
Super rough.
Snapcaster Mage will attack Dan down to 10. Jim can play an Arid Mesa and just pass the turn back. And here we get to the point where Dan is just going to start to run away with the game as he solidifies his board presence.
Yeah, it's going to be really hard for Jim to get through any damage on the ground from this point onward. I feel like Jim really needs the top deck, something like a Manus Rider into some burn spells. Maybe another Snapcaster Mage so that he can push some damage while also getting a chump blocker.
A Mantis Rider is a card that we haven't seen in any of the games that we've had Jim on camera against Bant Eldrazi.
Yeah.
Just got word Kevin Jones has won his match, so we can put his hat into the drawing for top 8 possibilities. Whether or not he is one of the 3 or one of the 4 that will be on the sidelines.
Seems like it was a pretty good day for Metagame Gurus. We'll have to see how things break with the top 8, but so far so good.
So Dan is just going to play an Eldrazi Sky Spawner, get the 1/1, use the 1/1 and 2 additional lands to play an Eldrazi Displacer. And this looks like it's going to be real rough for Jim as he's just continuing to draw lands in his 19-land deck.
Oh, man. I got to figure out Jim's favorite ice cream flavor because he's going to need some cheering up after this.
Oh, do we have a Reality Smasher?
Jeez. And this is the point where, yeah.
And the look on Jim's face says it all. 3rd consecutive winning in on camera.
Yeah.
So we can add, we got Joe Lissette, Jacob Baugh, and now Dan Musser can be added to the list that have prevented Jim from making it into the top 8 the last 3 tournaments in a row.